Robert, tell me why I'm wrong. That I've come to believe over the last 5 days. It started a while back, where someone said, "Viva, would you support sanctions on Canada for what the government is doing to Canadian citizens under COVID?" And I said, "What good is that? You're just going to punish us who are already being punished." And I've now come to believe that sanctions are a form of economic terrorism because you are literally trying to punish the civilian population ostensibly for the argument of make them suffer enough so they revolt against their tyrannical governments for political purposes. And tell me why I'm wrong.
It's almost never worked that way. Almost
well,
never.
But is it? Am I being hyperbolic? Is it wrong of me to say sanctions are economic terrorism because you are literally targeting civilians for political purposes?
Well, there are twofold problems. Take sanctions against some really bad regimes, Iraq, Cuba, and Venezuela. In those, what did it ultimately result in? Millions of poor people starving, dying, not getting basic medical care, not getting basic food, because those regimes are exactly the kind of regimes that they will find a way that they do not suffer because of those sanctions. Somebody else will. And then secondly, did it result in revolutions within those countries? Almost never. Almost never. So I've been a skeptic of it from day one. I believe in protectionism on trade because that has had a long history of working to achieve what you want. Because that's about protecting what people buy within your own borders, where you have a lot more influence and control. When you're trying to dictate, what goes within another country's borders, which you don't control, it almost always backfires. I mean, there's been hundreds of studies on sanctions, and almost every single one of them has said, by the way, this doesn't work. And it can have horrific consequences on the very populations you're trying to protect.
Someone said go to hold on, let me bring it up here. Does Robert know if Russia blew up a gas delivery system? Viva, if you want real footage, go on to Gorsuch. I don't know. Live Leak no longer exists. Augrish no longer exists. I was born in the internet days when the internet was only good for naked people and very bad videos. Now you can't even get it. The internet is whitewashed, so I don't even know where to get the actual raw stuff. Twitter used to be good, and they're still good, but there's a lot of fake stuff on Twitter. But Robert, go for it.
I was going to say, but yes, to the earlier question, I mean, this can accelerate in very dangerous ways. Glenn Greenwald had a good piece today about how if you've studied the history of war, and I mean all back to as far as you can go, a lot of the wars people get into are dumb mistakes made by greedy politicians in an emotional moment of their emotional populace that leads to horrendous consequences. So we should absolutely be very, very careful. My view is it's not our business. Let Russia and Ukraine work it out.
And that's not to be insensitive. It's if Russia and Ukraine work out their regional dispute with their respective powers, it resolves itself quickly, where maybe Zelensky says, okay, I'll abide by my election platform promises to do it.
Exactly. Our involvement has been net negative. And this was the point John Quincy, our founders made this point over and over again because they had knew history. They got a classical education before the Rockefeller Foundations of the world took over and part of our public education system, which is its own story. That when we had most Americans had classical style education all the way through the 1840s, 1850s. If you had that historical education, you knew how this almost always backfires. That's why he said, one person on our locals thought I was saying that America's fought is against monsters. They misunderstood the quote. The quote is, we go searching for monsters. We don't go abroad searching for monsters to destroy. Is it because that everybody out there that's justified a war as a monster? It's rather because that's always been the excuse and pretext for war. But the point is that even if you were going after a monster, chances are it's going to backfire. You're not going to be able to. It's the reason why I'm still skeptical of the Russian military action. I'm skeptical that they can achieve what they want to achieve through military means. I might be wrong, because again, the counterpoint to this is long, broad view of history is many countries have more often achieved what they wanted politically through military and martial means than not. But I remain a skeptic of it, and maybe that's partially because I prefer peace to war wherever possible anyway.
Well, because we both don't make our respective livings off of war, but rather we would love to just not talk about this stuff. But Robert, so here's the question.
As to China, Taiwan, China doesn't. How is Taiwan an imminent national security risk to China? Only if the United States made the mistake of certain comments. That's why we should not take the Chinese trap of saying we're going to go in and defend Taiwan, because then they'll say, aha, now Taiwan is a national security risk to us. But right now they can't make that claim.
This is my
That doesn't
question.
mean they won't try to do it, but it means legally they can't.
It hasn't happened yet. We'll see. The question is this. So targeting civilians, sanctions, whether or not you consider it to be economic terrorism, the question is this. Strategically, does it not backfire in obvious ways? Remove Russia from the SWIFT banking system. They'll take China, potentially India, potentially the United Arab Emirates with them. And then what has America and the West done other than, relegated themselves to half of the world's economy? Am I wrong? Am I dumb? Am I not understanding something?
I mean, it's because the U.S. powers that be still see the world through a unipolar perspective. And they don't understand we now live in a multipolar world. I mean, that's when, to a certain degree, what Putin and Russia did was cross a Rubicon and say, no more unipolar world. We're now in a multipolar world. And some of us have been warning about this, saying a multipolar world is going to have China be a big power player. And is that really in U.S. interest? But that ship has sailed. And more sanctions push Russia right into the loving arms of Xi. China is the biggest winner from all of this by far. Their economic system will now get promoted more. They'll get more of Russia's natural resources. And if they ever form a military self-defense, mutual defense agreement, well, compare their armed forces to the combined U.S. NATO armed forces, and we got a bit of a problem.
But and not just that, also their geographic. I don't think I'm wrong. Their relative geographic isolation. You got China and Russia very far away from Europe, which is a highly concentrated nation of countries, and North America. I mean, it's great. It's actual geographic isolationism coupled with massive military defense of international ICBM capabilities. It's great. I mean, it's great, but
China's a resource-poor country in certain respects, and while we've helped them align with Russia, where they're going to, I think, build 3 pipelines now between Russia and China. So I don't think that, but it's because there are people in the State Department, for corruption reasons, some for political reasons, undervalue the geopolitical risk that China poses, in my opinion. And like J.D. Vance got a lot of criticism for saying, let's worry about our borders and drug cartels a lot more than we worry about Russia and Ukraine's latest conflict.
Robert, we might never get to the other law stuff for tonight, but we'll do this while it's going. After watching the Super Chats, I wonder if Cuban Missile Crisis is taught in schools. It is not taught in schools. Robert, give us a 2-minute overview of the Cuban Missile Crisis and how that became the end of times back in the day.
It was kind of it came about for 2 different reasons. First, of course, Fidel Castro takes over, his revolution wins. We had people who supported it, people who opposed it. We were all over the place. Just Google Frank Sturgis, find out all the interesting photos, and from the hills of Santiago to Watergate. Somehow Frank Sturgis shows up. He shows up hanging out with Yasser Arafat, North Africa too. I mean, a lot of interesting places about how maybe the real power operates behind the scenes. But after Castro took over, we did the Bay of Pigs, which was a failed invasion, and Castro wanted nuclear armaments from the Soviet Union on Cuban soil to deter any further invasion. And there was talk amongst Cubans of actually using those weapons. People like Che were part crazy. So that's one aspect of what was happening. Second aspect is the U.S. had put nuclear weapons within 90 miles of the Soviet Union's border. And the Khrushchev was very unhappy about that. So because of that combination, the Soviet Union agreed to the Cuban request and put missiles in Cuba. And there was aspects of the Russian military that was ready to actually wage nuclear war, because you always have people that are that crazy. You don't have to watch Dr. Strangelove to figure that out. And then, so we were totally apparently caught by surprise. We didn't know they were there until they were there, which is another failure of U.S. intelligence, be one of many during the Cold War. And so the concern was you had, missiles by a hostile regime 90 miles from the Florida coast that could easily reach anywhere in the United States. This was before a time period where it would be easy for other missiles to reach each other. And so consequently, people thought we were right on the cusp of nuclear war. And there were people within the military that wanted it, the U.S. military and the Russian military. because they thought somehow we could survive it. I mean, it was just insanity. And you have some people like that are that insane within the U.S. State Department to this day. And you have people that are that nuts within the Russian military infrastructure. Now, contrary to the media narrative that, oh, Putin's gone crazy, he's nuts, he's loony, Putin's been very consistent. Like I said, go back and read his article from last summer, which is long and detailed with history and detail. You can see he said that the anti-Russia project in Ukraine, he considered, and the Russians considered, equal to a weapon of mass destruction. So by that point, you knew what Putin thought. He thought if they ever escalated, and then over the weekend, before the military action by Russia, the two things happened. They did mass shelling in the Donbass, and the nitwit Zelensky, president of Ukraine, went to the Munich Security Conference and said, hey, why not nuclear weapons? He's already crossed the NATO threshold. Now he crossed the nuclear weapons threshold while he's attacking Russians or native Russians in the Donbass. So, I mean, it was just one dumb decision after the other, but that's how crazy things happen. So the only way this de-escalates is if the West stays out of it. If the West would just stay out of it, this would reach its own resolution. If the West gets involved, that's how it could get a lot worse real fast.